Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this public program in conjunction with Jagdeep Raina's solo exhibition, Beautiful Zameen, which is currently open at Cooper Cole in Toronto. This is the last week of the exhibition, so if you're in town, please be sure to stop by. If you're not in town, let us know if we can help you access it digitally, if that is of interest. I'd like to welcome Jagdeep Raina, who's here, as well as Madhur Anand and Hasabie Kidanu, who will be sharing some of their work, as well as responses to Jagdeep's exhibition and work. My name is Magdalyn. I'm the Director of Research at Cooper Cole, and I'll be moderating the program. So before we get into it, I would like to pass it off to Jagdeep. I thought maybe he could speak about Jagdeep, if you could speak about what inspired you to curate this program and why you've, brought these people here together today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Magdalyn, for the introduction, and to everybody for coming in and joining for this program. The first thing I just wanted to mention that, I'm very grateful to be speaking from the site of the Indigenous peoples, specifically the Arakapa Ishak, the Tapilam Kwahuli the Sanaban of the Tanakwa tribe, and the Karanakawa nations. And I'm really grateful to be living and working, speaking from these lands today. And speaking of lands, what it means to be on a contested land, I think in many ways, that's kind of at the root and at the core of what this exhibition is about, Beautiful Zameen. And as Magdalyn mentioned, Zameen translates to land. And I was thinking a lot about the idea of what it means to put together an exhibition and how to take kind of the concept of a solo presentation and subvert it to allow it to be opened up into a space where other people can gather, fellow artists, writers, people working in other interdisciplinary fields. And I feel like from the beginning of when I was putting together this program, the two people that kept coming to my head were Hasabie Kidanu and Madhur Anand. Hasabie and I met 5 years ago at a residency in Maine, and we've always stayed in touch throughout the years. Her work for me has always made me think a lot about this idea of land, specifically landscapes that feel fictional, landscapes that are rooted in a space that are not fictional, and thinking a lot about the land through this lens of history and how history is something that isn't fixed, but something that one can revisit over and over again. And I remember having conversations with her around like texts and different writers and artists, and like Tacita Dean and Svetlana Boyne and Toba Kaduri, and the way that she approached her work, thinking about history in the landscape through her beautiful animations and her printmaking and her drawing. Like her work was like always in my head. So I was like, I am inviting her to do something one day. And then similarly with Madhur and I met 4 years ago. I'd known about Madhur's work because I'd gone to a poetry reading 4 years ago. That was at the Art Gallery of Guelph, which is an art museum in my hometown. And she had presented a series of poems, and one of them was about Indian birds. And I remember it really stayed with me. And then I organized a public program at that same museum a few months later, and she came to that. And then I remember she came to that, and I kind of hunted her down. I sent her an email, and we started this really beautiful conversation, kind of spanning many different things: environmental histories, textiles, thinking about the global south, thinking about birds, thinking about trees, plants, water, thinking about friendships, kinship, thinking about this idea of the artist and the mentor, because in many ways she's also been a mentor and a teacher to me. So it was really fitting for me to kind of reach out to Madhur as well, and kind of and let her know, like, I really want to have you speak and invite you to share your poetry with me. So it kind of grew from there, and I'm just really grateful to the both of them for making the time. It's a Monday evening, it's Diwali, there's like 6 million things happening. So I'm really grateful that the both of them made the time to hang out and just be a part of this program. And of course, Magdalyn for kind of being so central and important to helping steer this program together, moderating it. I'm really grateful to you, and also Cooper Cole for being such an amazing program to be a part of, and allowing me to think about ways in which this exhibition can kind of coexist beyond just the gallery space. So I'm really, really grateful.
Thanks so much, Jagdeep. Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for sure to speak of, your work is so layered, right? There's so many stories and dialogues and sort of technical aspects to it that layer together, that really emerge from your experience with all these different people and different disciplines. So it's nice to bring it to light in this way for sure.
Yeah.
So the format of this program is going to be that each participant will have 10 or 15 minutes to do a presentation. That's going to be a mix of different practices. And so I'll start, we're going to start with Jagdeep Raina. And so I'll read your brief bio just going in, just for people to, orient. So Jagdeep is currently a fellow at the core program at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. Before that, he was a Paul Mellon Fellow at Yale University, a recipient of the 2020 Sobey Art Award, and a resident at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. He received his BFA from Western University in 2013 and his MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design in 2016. He's exhibited internationally at the Blaffer Art Museum in Houston, Jhaveri Contemporary in Mumbai, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto, the Textile Museum of Canada, Soft Opening in London, the Art Gallery of Guelph, the Art Gallery of Alberta, the Rubin Art Museum in New York, the RISD Museum of Art, and the Camden Art Center in London. And Jagdeep is joining us today from Houston, where he's currently located, as he mentioned. So I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Magdalyn. So for my kind of presentation, I'm going to be sharing some poems that I've been writing in response to some of the work in the exhibition. Another reason why I wanted to also bring Madhur into the program is, in addition to being an amazing writer and teacher, Madhur has also been kind of a poet mentor to me, and like doing workshops with her and reading a lot of different poetry, and similar to Haas's text too, like the way that she approached her writing, and through the medium of a letter. I felt really inspired by both Haas and Madhur and their relationship to language, and thinking about using my own kind of relationship to language and using and presenting that for tonight's program. So they're still kind of newish poems. I haven't really shared them. I'm a bit nervous. So I'm really looking forward to sharing these writings with you guys. And they're going to be in response to some of these pieces in the exhibition. So I'm just gonna quickly mute my video and then I'm gonna read. So this first poem is entitled River Lovers. I cannot stop flirting in this river, our river, wet and wise. But behind it, the Zamindar stares at us. He's dripping with bits of spit and drool that's dripping from his greasy mouth. He frowns with distrust. His eyebrows rise, then they fall, then they rise, then fall again. It's time to say goodbye, to leave the river. I'm pissed. Go away, I slyly whisper to the Zamindar. My lover starts to laugh. We giggle with our fingers, clasped over our mouths. Her long braided plait swings and hits my ass, and we smirk, step out of the wet Janab River. She wipes away my sweat. Then we walk back, solemnly and quietly. She goes left, I go right, towards the lane of sugarcane, ignoring cat calls from men smoking on manjas, playing their drums. They didn't see that I had soiled in their pot, where I kept the dough to cook this rot of food for them. I'll smirk, these are the bits of my power, and I'll spit in their food, poor babies. Meanwhile, my lover croons away in her own village. She's far yet close to me. We're free. Say hello when you see me. The sisters had a love that was as ancient as the river Ravi. They learned to slip their fingers one by one into each other, kinship softly sewn together, like a spider embroidering her silver web. Hanging thread by thread, they left their home to wander to the edge of the fields. What a sight, they whispered, as the birds greeted them. Dear sisters, say hello when you see us. The birds smiled. The birds smiled. And the sisters nodded. Then the birds kissed them, gently brushing their lips with sugarcane, gently using their beaks to coil their hair with bamboo, dropping nuts and fruits in their palms, lifting them up by their braids into the skies where they went back home. Say hello. Say hello. the only sound left. I still dream of your battered charka and long for your wheel to spin seeds that I will plant in your black braids, where rice fields will grow and hold hands with the crops. These two lovers gently climbing out of your thick hair, their Phulkaris stitched with gold silk that unravels and flows from the sugarcane. Those old roads. Those old roads, the old man yelled, spitting charcoal and mudstones where he worked. He cries and looks me in the eye. They'll eat you up. They'll kill you. Then he falls. With my trembling hands, I stroke his face. On these old roads. The Moloch yells, he gave me hell. His fingers point to the old man, who now lies dead, his hands stroking my hips, my joints. Turning immortal. Every day with her brown, blistered hands, bleached with Punjabi flour, coarse like raw silk, like dust, her back bent like a black crow, like a witch, wide-eyed, thick with dark surma, sees her sisters leave, one by one, married off to men with tempers, bloated juts of the wild land, their clammy hands stretched for gold. Her Baba weeps, a cloud of pasty grief, of smoke. She will rise, born in wetlands, Rajasthani deserts, woman of the Bind, spirits unleashing her stolen life. Cheap girl, waste of time. She needs and needs, mixing bread from her gilded, lush clay pot. Bred as a good housewife, modest, marked, sheepish, a perfect bride, she rebels, often screams, dancing on her clay pot, loose-lipped, unkempt. Her Baba tells her when the night falls they will leave, disappear, live together in one small wooden boat, burning the dowry. She with her clay pot, her toothless Baba, kind-eyed and quick, with wooden sticks, carved from Ragosa trees, long, slender, thick. Good grief. Look at them, turning immortal. Spirit in the village fields. Remember that long lost spirit, hiding behind the trees, quietly picking plums, her gentle fingers sticky with lasuda leaves, India green that rests on her skin. Deep in the clay pot, the leaves fall, glossy now. Look at the wounds. Look at the smooth way she flattens the leaves, moving them up and down the skin of her children as their wounds leave. Who was she, this spirit, watching us with thick, bated breath? Like xylem, she gave us water that flowed from the roots, the stems, transporting the nutrients. She waves at us with her wooden skin. Xylem G, the children cry, come back, please don't leave us. Xylem G, they called her, her bangles from Ladakh, her name from Greece, xylo that meant wood in ancient Greek. Who knows where she came from, but she slips away from the children and floats towards the plum trees, her hands full of those lasuda leaves that still linger and heal. Those children grew up and soon fell apart, their dreams bootlegged and sold for the steep price of loneliness. Lasuda leaves, once upon a time when she used to love them, find them, xylem. Archive lover bird. Punjabi birds in carbon print, Indian roller, Baj kabudar, soft pink bulbul, dark purple wings, Kali titter facing left, beak poised to sing. I tried looking in the weak sunlight of Lahore, my fingers bleached with hand sanitizer on Grand Trunk Road, at Anarkali Bazaar, in the holy skies of Kartarpur. I want those birds to carry me past invisible border lines, like the ghosts of partition, who still insist on taking selfies with us. Mom's sister's husband said that in Ladakh, if one sees a crow on the roof of a house, it is supposed to forebode evil. It is not enough to hear it. A faded copy of Birds of Kashmir in PDF, just like the laughing thrush. The copy warily smiles. Look at those snow whistles, those garden birds moving through cool winters from the Punjab to the Himalayas to Kashmir. I'll press my palm to the sheet of paper, coat my fingers with gelatin, and kiss my fingers to the ancient text, watching the birds and the corpses follow each other from bush to bush, from tree to tree. The Thickles Truss has a brown iris with green yellowish eye rim. They are seen in the Gothi willow orchard in the spring, sometimes making birds entirely of thread, found in the veranda of a garden where the shalwalas once embroidered their pashmina butte. Indian tailor birds use their beaks as sewing needles. Instead, I crush cardamom pods and roses, coiling and smoothing out muslin. I need to unspool and unwind the silk thread. I need to create wings and embroidery. And the last poem, which is in the exhibition and which is embroidered on as a border, is entitled The Great Divide. She takes her camera and crawls into the tractor, where she's wedged between 9 clay jugs and the 7 women who smile. Come with us to collect the water, and so she rides with them through mustard-colored fields, while the sun shines down on them, casting shadows like 7 scorching bindis, covering them in sweat. They arrive at the water well, cup their sweat in their hands, dripping the warm liquid into the soil. They take their journeys to wipe their faces. They laugh. The first woman in the group has a salwar kameez, lukewarm yellow, a tuni the color of lime. She kneels on the land and tells of the wild fish that swam in the once clean river Ravi, that now stares at them piteously. The second woman stands, her suit the color of mahogany, her tuni the color of coriander. She doesn't say anything, but her hands stroke the smooth bark over and over again. She bends to kiss the last standing kicker tree. In the corner, the 2 youngest women sit on the last remaining patch of emerald grass. They hug their knees to their chests and laugh softly, a temporary rest, a private quiet. They're adorned in purple and white chunies, orange and sky blue suits. The 5th woman is somber and gentle. Water flows from the rusty tap, pouring into the jug. Her arm rests on her leg, and she speaks of their great-grandmother who lost the gungat flower work she once embroidered, and the jewelry she also made, heirlooms destroyed in the blazes of the Great Divide. The 6th and 7th women stand nearby, the quietest and eldest of them all. They open their mouths, but no words come out. Instead, 2 beautiful voices chime in unison, a folk song by Noor Jahan that pierces the field and the sky. Noor Jahan, the nightingale Pakistan claimed, but once loved by their grandmother on the other side of the border. Her records lost, destroyed in the blazes of the Great Divide. Now 7 women sing, Chandani Rate, these moonlight nights don't let me sleep. The stories of her love don't let me sleep. And the 6th and 7th women soon start crying. They cry for the corpses of their loved ones in the polluted rivers. They cried for their disappearing Zameen that once loved them. They cried for the long unfurling cloth once embroidered with symbols disappearing. The peacocks, the Punjabi birds, the monsoon, the black smoke of the trains that took away their grandmothers, leaving behind nothing but the Nazar Batu. And the woman slowly backs away from them, her camera emerging. Let me take her photo, she says. And 7 women nod while the sun shines down on them, casting shadows like 7 scorching bindis. I'll stop there. Thank you so much, everybody.
That was incredible. Thank you. Thank you, Jagdeep.
As the light turns off and I have to walk.
You have to walk around. Okay, next we will welcome Hasabie Kidanu. She is a visual artist working in printmaking and film animation. She received her MFA at the Yale School of Art in 2017. Her films have been screened at the Rotterdam International Film Festival, the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts, Jan van Eyck Academy, and Film Madrid. Hasabie is the recipient of the Jerome Hill Artist Grant from 2019 to 2021, and she's been a member of the Blackburn Printmaking Studio in New York since 2014. She was most recently a filmmaking instructor at the Yale School of Art summer program at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia. Hasabie is 1/4 of Digital Ancestors, an independent publishing cooperative based in Brooklyn, New York. So we'd like to welcome you, Hasabie.
Okay, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. For the sake of time, I would like to start by reading a text that I wrote for this exhibition. And it was really beautiful to be given a chance to write for a body of work, to write something for a body of work that I've seen in stages, because me and Jag actually share so much of our work before it's completed, before it reaches the completion stage. And so I wanted to read this text, and then I'll move on to sharing an excerpt of an animation that I'm currently working on that I do think shares some of the same themes that Jag is also working with. So I'll start with my letter. Dear Jag, sometimes I feel far from the generations of hands, picking, spinning, dyeing, embroidering. I would like to lay my hands on theirs and trace the collaboration of countless minds, eyes, fingers that measure, push, tug, and knot. Each seedling, bird, cloud, field you make draws my hand toward it. But though I can't touch, I can see that embroidery is a good teacher. Small, slow gestures become worlds that are first premeditated. One can say they are worlds desired, then made. This sort of making was developed next to seasons and rhythms unchanged for generations. Machines and their logics of efficiency and speed have worked against the environment and the relations that were of those other worlds. Your tapestries, like us, people who work anachronistically, endure despite an uncertain future. We look toward the past, not for nostalgia, but because we ask what it means to make now as was made before. We know it's not the same. We want the difference. Maybe it's a way of closing in the distance. By making the past a present material, we can take the true and sacred, discard the rest. These works are beautiful to me because they express the ongoing desire for a world made gently over many months and years by caring hands, old and new. And I am with you in the struggle to keep my hands moving, making a world we deserve. So that's the piece I wrote for the exhibition. And for what I'm going to share is maybe 2 or 3 minutes of an animation I'm currently working on. This was a work brought on by a new phase in my development and in my work that started during the pandemic, where I was discovering the power of what it means to be in your domestic dwelling for so long, and really scaling down my operation and sticking to very small scale hand drawings. I started an animation project with rotoscoping. Rotoscoping is a very early cinema technique of drawing directly on film, frame by frame. You draw directly on clear film. It's 35 millimeters wide. So you're essentially making a movie without a camera. And it really felt very similar to the way you would handle textile or you do embroidery, because it's very cumulative actions that actually complete the work. So I was talking to Jag a lot during that time as well. And it was an exercise of really using my hands every day, moving my hands every day, because there was so much uncertainty and anxiety that I was feeling at the time that really was being calmed by this exercise. So what the content of the work, at the beginning at least, was me creating a study tool for the Amharic alphabet. Amharic is a language that's spoken in Ethiopia. Semitic language, very similar, in the same language branch as Arabic and Hebrew, with its own script. And there's 33 characters, and each character has 7 forms of pronunciation based on the shape. So it's a already very animated alphabet script. And this writing is studied and memorized as a sing-along by children before they can go and put letters together to form words and sentences. So I was looking at drawing as a cumulative exercise, the relationship between drawing and writing, the relationship between language and nature, which will make sense when I show this animation, the tactility of film itself, and the formal considerations of composition, including color, line, transformation, transparency. And I think I have a picture of me working on it just to give you a sense of the scale. Me and Jag have talked about preservation of languages and preservation of these skills that come from kind of a localized or very local spaces. And I think maybe this project for me wasn't necessarily about preservation of a language because it's so very much spoken in Ethiopia. But when it comes to the diaspora community in America, that access drastically changes because the context is just so different. So it was a way for me to provide maybe a different way of learning the language and continuing that access, even though you're removed or very distant from the space in which you'd normally speak it. So children was my audience, language is my subject. So I'll share a little bit of this animation. Yeah, you, ye, ya, ye, yo. De, do, di, da, de, do. Ja, je, jo. Ge, gi, ga, ge, ge. Tu, ti, ta, te, to. Ta, te, to. Pu, pi, pa, pe, po. Se, su, si, sa, se, so. Fe, fu, fi, fa, fe, fo. Pe, pu, pi, pa, pe, po. I'll stop that here. I'll stop that here for the sake of time, but that was towards the end anyways.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So now I'll introduce Madhur Anand, who is a poet and an environmental scientist. Her debut book of prose, The Red Line Goes Straight to Your Heart, won the Governor General's Literary Award for Nonfiction. Her debut collection of poems, A New Index for Predicting Catastrophes, was the finalist for the Trillium Book Award for Poetry. Named one of 10 all-time trailblazing poetry collections by the CBC and received a starred review in Publishers Weekly. Her second collection of poems, Parasitic Oscillations, was published to international acclaim and named the top pick for spring poetry by the CBC. She is a professor of ecology and sustainability at the University of Guelph, where she was appointed the inaugural director of the Guelph Institute for Environmental Research. And so welcome, Madhur. Would you like me to pull up the images right away? You're muted.
Sorry. You can pull up the first one for sure, and we
Okay.
can look at it while I just say a few words of introduction
Great.
to do this, or just a few words of welcome, I guess. Yeah, well, thank you, Jagdeep. I'm so thrilled to do this and to do this with you. And wow, those were both incredible presentations. I love the poems, Jagdeep, and the animation was incredibly. I'm speechless. I'm speechless, really. So many things I want to say about it, actually. Hasabie. So, but let's see. I'll just quickly say that indeed I came upon Jagdeep's work. I mean, not randomly, because the Art Gallery of Guelph, was showing an exhibition of his work, and I do remember, I'm in a very different part of the university. Most of the time I'm in a school of environmental science, but I remember it was towards the end of my day, but I saw come through my mail or something like that, or a poster on campus at the end of the day, saying that there was going to be this exhibition called Chase. I didn't know Jagdeep or his work at that time. And I just kind of, instead of going directly home, I thought, I'm just going to stop in at this exhibition and see what it's like. I mean, my parents were born and grew up in areas of the Punjab. So, there is sort of also this overlap of interest in South Asian art and work. So I went, and, it was an incredible gathering. Already back then, there was a gathering of different people, and I think we briefly met at the end of that exhibition and exchanged a few words, and Jagdeep indicated an interest in learning more about environmental science, and then basically our relationship started from there. It's really a long story with many, many profound moments, including an incredible exchange where he came to my house here in Guelph, and I casually mentioned, he told me he was working on, embroidery and on the study of Phulkaris, and he started to explain what they were, and I was like, oh, well, I know what you mean. I have my mother's in my closet. And I went and got out my mother's Phulkari, which was inherited from her mother. And, he was just, shocked to find that in my house. And we draped it over the sofa in my office here. And we spent a long time talking about it. And he educated me on the history and the art of the Phulkari. And we just continued to talk about many things after that. So I'm thrilled to see, Punjabi birds in his embroideries. They just, I don't know, they just my heart leaps when I see him embroider, when I see those pieces, because I've seen some of them, I think I've seen them, before, and my heart just leaps when I see his interpretation of them and his interest in them as an artist. And in fact, so much so that some of these anecdotes that I've told you about actually literally found their way into this book of poetry, my latest book of poetry. There's a section At the end, in Parasitic Oscillations, I've written a very long poem that sort of spans about 2 years of time, and including time in the pandemic, and there's some lines of, you know, some of exchanges that I had with Jagdeep in the poem. So it's a really collaborative process. So I'm going to read you about 3 or so excerpts from my books that I feel like they were written before I saw Jagdeep's work, but I feel that, you know, these things, like, yeah, there are nonlinear interactions in art and in community. So I think they still speak to these images and this work. So let's see, this first one is The Great Divide, beautiful Zameen. And I think what I will read in response to this piece is the very, very first, almost the first part of my creative nonfiction book, the experimental memoir, where one half of the book, I've written stories of my parents' lives in the first person, alternating in my mother and father's voices, which again, you know, they originate in the Punjab. And then halfway through, you have to flip over the book and there's another cover, and there's stories in my own voice as their daughter and as, you know, just sort of second generation experiences as, and, you know, becoming a poet and scientist. So I'll just read you a teeny small excerpt from this, which refers to a great divide, which is, of course, the partitioning of India in 1947 into different areas, and in particular in the area that my parents were living and born, the partitioning of that region into, you know, Pakistan and India. These chapters called Everyone Has It. In 1947, a line is drawn across the state of Punjab. The man who draws it imagines an organic, undulating curve like a river. What cannot be seen is how it changes course every year. If a river cuts the left bank, it deposits silt on the right, and vice versa. Everything in nature at first seems straightforward, but closer inspection reveals something sinuous and ultimately crooked. Punjab means 5 rivers. Adding a line like a river by hand on a map does not seem unreasonable. His little arrows indicating human displacement are impeccable. But at that point in history, scientists have discovered infrared radiation, galactic redshifts, and continental drift. In The Origin of Species, Darwin has already written, "It is interesting to contemplate a tangled bank, clothed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing on the bushes, with various insects flitting about, and with worms crawling through the damp earth, and to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other and dependent upon each other in so complex a manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us." But maps are still of very poor resolution. What cannot be seen are fenceless farmers' fields, entwined bodies of lovers, birds nesting. Superconductivity has been discovered, but there is still no known mechanism to trigger the amplification of electrical currents without the input of a human hand, the flicking of a switch. So if we could just go on to the next image. Ah, yes. There are corpses in the rivers of Punjab. Well, that text could fit this image as well. But I'll read now a little bit from. I'll read you a poem from my first collection of poetry. Again, since my family's ancestry has overlap in this area. Gosh, there's so many parts of my memoir that could fit with this image, and so I and even with Jagdeep's title, right, itself is a little. It's a poetic line. There are corpses in the rivers of Punjab. But I'm going to read something maybe slightly oblique, but still related. I've never been back to my parents' hometowns. They never have been back because they were refugees in the partition. They had to cross over to the other side. They were both born on what's now the Pakistan side of Punjab. And so, and my mother, when she speaks of her childhood home and land, she talks very much, the river plays a very big part in her memories, in her childhood memories, the Dor River. It's where she bathed, where she went with her friends, where the teachers would take the whole class to the Dor River to bathe. Later on, they move over to the Indian side. She speaks about the little river that was near her home in Dehradun and how they would wash clothes in it and so on. So there's really a very strong memory of, the land and the river. But this poem is entitled Parle Ji. My maternal great-grandparents grew species of plums and apricots I've never seen. Corn, wheat, vegetables, buffaloes, and cows for milk, donkeys to carry goods hours to markets in Haripur to exchange for raw sugar and dal. Now orange loquats can be found in boxes on Spadina. Mother picks them singly. She snaps off the tough, leathery leaves that just add weight. Mother and I are drinking black tea, a taste acquired after independence. Camellia sinensis doesn't owe flavor to genetics. I stare hard at the little girl's face on this yellow and red package of Indian glucose cookies, their brand name pronounced Parle-Ji, with a voice in my head, my convincing French accent, though Ji in Hindi is Hindi and translates loosely to respected. In botany, pubescent means hairy, but loquat leaves lose this trait before maturity. And yeah, if we can go to the last one. Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. I absolutely adore this piece. I have seen it. I'm pretty sure Jagdeep showed it to me at some point. I'm pretty sure I have seen it, felt it. So yeah, I mean, I wish that Jagdeep would even speak about this, this piece and the kind of, mashup of the Indian birds and the Phulkari piece, border on the bottom, which shares a lot of the colors and forms of my own mother's Phulkari. I say it's my mother's, but it's now mine. I took it and, she gave it to me, but it's mine now. So I feel like this kind of responsibility to hold it and honor it. Moon garden Punjabi birds. Let's see, what shall we do with that? You know what? I'm going to read a poem about my mother. And birds. So let's see. So this is the last thing I'm going to read. There. 33. So this is from my most recent collection of poetry that was published earlier this year in March. And this poem is entitled Rising Variance as an Early Warning. Today, Mother transplanted herself to the back deck without the walker. It was the sun, her first time out since the fall. The verb falling, the fractures curing, her eyes closed when I joined her. Days are becoming long, she said. And then, in Punjabi, 2 birds, one calling, one giving the answer. I know and she knows she has never heard these birds before. It took me some 40 years to learn such songs myself. But today's back and forth feels like something new. The 2-toned cardinals could be doing social work, averting warming, or slowing down time. Like that Chinese lake I read was flickering, alternating between its 2 states, dead or healthy, taking 20 years to settle on one. The birds are gone, but I'm still listening. One grandchild oscillates on the rusted swing set with past summer's wasp nests thrice removed. Creak, creak. The visual is a sine wave that becomes nearsighted near the end. I still use that trick I discovered in childhood. If I want to be cured of hiccups, I pretend to badly want the next one. I wish some things would just die a little more in spring. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So we have a bit of an audience now. At this point in the program, I'm happy to, facilitate any questions for people who are here. You can type them in the chat. And I have some questions too, maybe to begin. And I would love it also if you asked each other questions. I think that would be really nice. There are obviously a lot of, overlapping themes in your work. So it's really nice to see that through your presentations. I have a question about for Hasabie around the letter, and also your video as well. I thought it was really beautiful to think about, trace this idea of tracing the hands of your ancestors, and how that connects to what it means to make now as was before. I think that's the way you phrased it, as a way of closing the distance with the past, or closing distance with your ancestors. And there is a bit of that in the video work as well. How context can change something, in this case language. And so I was wondering if you could speak about this and how you see this in Jagdeep's work as well, that you brought it up in the letter in response to his exhibition. And actually, Hasabie's letter is included in the exhibition as well as part of the exhibition text. So it is a really important piece. So I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I guess there's a few kinds of distance that I think about. I think in Jag's work, and even my work, I think the main distance that I think about is the distance from the kind of generational knowledge that you get by way of hands and also by way of vicinity, right? And thinking about how sometimes being a subject that was raised in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, but is just so far away from like the elder women in my family that I can possibly spend weeks and months learning all this kind of very localized, very specific and particular skill set from. is not really there. I'm oftentimes working in my studio somewhere in my Brooklyn, New York apartment / studio setup. And so the context very dramatically shifts. And so that is the kind of distance that I think about. But I also think about the distance in relation to making handcraft works. Like, let's say if handcraft works signify this kind of local particularity or peculiarity, then when we are and are usually to be passed down the generations, right? From there's so many objects that are passed down from my grandmother to my mother to me, but when we're making artworks, I think that objects of use turn into objects of contemplation. So there's actually like a physical distance of like handling things when they are wrapped into this more kind of commercial art world, commodity world, that introduce a different kind of value. I feel distant from the tactility of them. Like, all I want to do with Jag's work is just touch them. I don't know if that's like an appropriate thing to say. I'm a little conflicted, but I want to hold it, I want to flip it, and I want to see it, you know. So there's the other distance, but I don't want to digress into that because I know we're operating in a different context of art making and value and labor and time. In relation to the alphabet animation, it was very much mostly looking at people like my cousins who live in the US who are not having children. And of course, their children are going to American schools, so that within one generation, the access to the native language is just lost. And so it was my way of trying to be creative and close in that distance and maybe provide at least the beginning kind of foundational tools, a fun way, a playful way to learn this alphabet, so that maybe they can kind of catch on. And you know, it was just me putting out in the world a different learning technique, really. So that was also the distance I was trying to close. And I hope I'm clear on that, but I can explain more.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. And I might bridge it into a question for Mother, because I know you also are on a time limit too, so I'd like to, you know, let you go when you need to. But I was interested in how in your book you write from, at one point you write from the perspectives of your parents, which I think must have been really challenging, like, you know, not just in terms of content, but also emotionally and imaginatively. And anyway, I was really curious about that as an artistic process. You know, what does that feel like? What does that look like? I know that's a lot, but I think it would, you know, it reminds me also of Hasabie's, you know, approach to this idea of, is it an attempt to close that distance, or was it a different sort of exercise?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I do apologize. I'm going to have to leave as soon as I finish answering my question, because it's Diwali and my family and my kids are like waiting for me to finish so that we can have the sweets. Because we have to do that part all together. And so I was like, I'm coming. So I'm going to talk really quickly and then I'm going to leave. But, you know, thank you so much, everybody, for, you know, this has just been so enriching. And I wish we had more time, but also happy Diwali. So, yeah, so the book, I mean, I did attempt at first. So what happened was, it was really largely because of the materials I had from which to write my book. And so, you know, to get a lot of the materials, I was doing a lot of research and stuff, but primarily everything started from my parents' own voices. I was sitting down, I wouldn't say interviewing, but I was sitting down for hours and hours over a long period of time, speaking with them, listening to them mostly, They don't mind telling stories. They don't mind talking, and they've been doing it all my life. I just, had deliberately started to, in fact, record them, because at some point I realized that I was going to want to write this book. And so I had their oral recordings because they're oral stories. And then the challenge was, of course, putting it into print and through my lived experience, to sort of translate them, really, even though I'm not translating across a language. They were speaking English for the most part, though I did include a lot of original Punjabi and Hindi phrases in the book because they use them so much and they're so indicative. So really it was that, I kept, when I first attempted to write their side of the book and their stories, I was trying to do them in the third person, in a kind of removed, objective, scientific sort of lens, because I bring in a lot of science into those stories, of the environment, of the land and everything. But it just didn't feel right. So that's one way I think writers can have distance, by putting things in the third person, and maybe as a first attempt that sort of helped me, but ultimately it just didn't sound authentic. And also it just didn't feel right, because to me, when the feeling of writing in the third person was like, this happened, he said this and this happened. It just felt like too factual. And I didn't really trust, historical almost, and I didn't really want it to have that effect. So I tried to rewrite one in the first person, like in my mother's voice, and all kinds of interesting things happened when I made that decision. I almost could get closer to her, because it is a kind of combined I. It's her I and it's my I. And it was that combined voice that, but with the kind of immediacy and authenticity of the first person, that I felt like was the best way to tell these stories. But now I'm 3 minutes over, and
Okay.
Forgive me, but I'm going to leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madhur.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. But we can stay because I do have a question for Jagdeep, and then absolutely, continue the conversation together. There is, I think one thing that was interesting about what Madhur was saying, and just thinking about you reading your poems, but also, I was thinking about a lot about the charka work, the video work that's in the exhibition right now. It always feels to me like, like you're either describing your own personal experience of these events, or you're witnessing it. And I feel like, I'm always curious about your position in relation to these stories, because it's a very intimate story that you're always telling. And in the charka work, for those who haven't seen it, and I'll let you speak more about it, it's two relatives having an argument. One has left the village and one has stayed, and you describe it as a commentary on colonialism's damaging impact on everything, including, these very intimate family relationships. And I see this as very important in your work, right? Examining narratives sort of occurring on the ground level, that are nonlinear, that are messy, that are, layered, and kind of placing that in a way that you complicate formal archives, or the way that lived experiences have been historicized by others. So it's so I'm curious about that, like, your position in relation to these stories, and maybe even if you could speak more about charka, because it is it was an experimental film to you, you said, so just would love more insight on that.
Totally. I read this quote earlier today by Robin Coast Lewis, and she's saying how, she talks about poetry and how it's not really about the language at all, but it's about the marks and the traces. And that really kind of stayed with me. And I think that's something I've been thinking a lot about with this body of work. And some of the writing that I've been doing is, or I've been reading, I'm sorry, is this like beautiful kind of jewel of a book that I found in an old bookstore in Pakistan. And it's a collection of folk tales and short stories from Kashmir, and it's from 1893. And it's just like full of like these really intense folk stories that kind of look at intimate relationships and the ways in which how relationships can become kind of damaged or eroded over time. And I think that's something I've been thinking a lot about with the specific body of work. And this book has also been on my mind, The Overstory by Richard Powers, which is kind of like an environmental fiction novel that looks at like a group of people in their relationship to trees. So those are some of the texts that kind of inspired Charka. And then I think that idea of like traces or like the residues of what's underneath when like the veil of language is lifted and what's left underneath. That's kind of what I was trying to find with making that animation. And also I think with putting together this program too, because I feel like there's no really fixed way at looking at history or looking at scientific research or looking at materiality. I think there's a really kind of material lens in which artists and writers and scientists and filmmakers can approach their work. And I think this idea of like traces and mark making, not only did that kind of inform the way I wanted Charka to kind of operate, but also it kind of informed my kind of curiosity at putting together this program, because I feel like I think Haas's work and Madhur's work for me go so much more than beyond language or beyond history or beyond environmental science. Is kind of what's the kind of the histories and the stories and the gaps that it's like kind of like left underneath, that emerged underneath. So I think for me at the core, I think if I were to think about this public program and also this exhibition and that animated film Charka, I think the word tracing and marks and like the residues of that, those are the things that kind of come to mind. And it's something that continues to linger with me. And I think it's kind of an exploratory way to kind of approach this too. And I think kind of what Haas alluded to earlier, where you said the relationship between drawing and writing, generational knowledge being lost, what are the effects of that, and how to kind of approach that, and how all those things are very bodily, like we carry them on our bodies. And we use our hands to think, to kind of operate and think about that. So I think this idea of like residues, marks, and traces as kind of the forms left the residues of that, and how they linger and how they go beyond the language of text or writing or kind of creating an object. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Definitely, if anyone in the chat wants to ask a question, now's a great time. We don't want to, keep you too late on a Monday night on Diwali. Yeah, Hasabie, Jagdeep, do you want to ask each other any questions? Is there I could continue, but I don't want to kind of take over the question portion of this.
I think it's not so much a question, but it's more of just like a token of like gratitude. I feel like just from Haas's like beautiful letter and her animated film, like there's so much that I'm kind of dwelling on. And Haas mentioned the term domestic dwelling, and that's like really beautiful. So I think if anything, I'm really excited to see the ways in which like Haas's practice kind of, like how you kind of surrender to your curiosities, I think, and kind of let your work and your film and your art like lead the way and see where it takes you. And I think this idea of like being in conversation with one another, and I think there's a way in which kind of the physical distance can be kind of like we're living in, I feel sometimes we're living in these kind of such times of intense isolation, even before the pandemic. And I feel like the conversations that that artists can have with one another, that artists can have with other artists or writers or scientists or filmmakers, like it helps kind of alleviate the gap a little bit. And that's something that Haas has always taught me in her work. So I think not so much a question, but I'm excited, Haas, for you to keep following your curiosity as a filmmaker and artist, and just all the work you're doing and the research on oral history and the writing. It's just like really inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you. It was very special. Thank you so much.
Someone has asked a question, if you want to answer for you, Jagdeep. It's about the language on your pieces. I think probably the Great Divide. Randy was asking if it's in Sanskrit. So you can speak to that. Yeah.
It's actually Punjabi. And the one, I think it's in a couple of the tapestries, but the main one that it's written in is the ones of the birds. And it was just kind of thinking a lot about writing the different types of bird names, not just in English, but in Punjabi. So the thickles thrush, the golden oriole, the different types of peacocks. And luckily, feeling a kinship with Haas's film, and even with Madhur's writing, like, I feel like I was lucky enough to learn how to like write and read certain languages from South Asia, while at the same time losing access to other languages. So I think one of the ways to resurrect language is again thinking about resurrecting it through your hands. And so I think making a conscious effort to embroider their names in Punjabi was something that was just kind of intentional as a way for myself and the viewer to be enveloped in a type of history that kind of is really multiple in the ways in which it kind of coexists across different types of cultural contexts. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. They say love the birds. Thank you for your answer. And actually, that was I was wondering if I could ask about the birds, because birds have come up in all three of your work as well. It was in your animation, Hasabie, and as well, obviously, Mother, even though she's had to leave, it was in her. She responded very strongly to your work with the Punjabi birds. I'm curious about it. Is it something that's is it something that you look to in terms of, like, for example, in Greek, you do this with plants. You tell stories about the human condition through looking at plants. You'll give an analogy or a metaphor through looking at a plant. Is there sort of a similar everyday resonance for birds for you? Or is it, just a way of examining everyday things?
I think it's both. And that's really interesting, and that you mentioned plants as well, because in the last poem, the figure, the kind of the spirit in the fields poem is, there's a reference to xylem, which is a Greek for xylo, which means wood, and which is a type of, that was something that is really cool for you to just mention that, because I've also been thinking a lot about different types of plant structures and different types of trees, and the Lasuda leaves. The Lasuda had a type of leaf that certain birds indigenous to India would rest on, and Lasuda was known for people to pre-industrialization, they would pick the leaf and rub it on skin as a way to help heal wounds. So I think birds play many different roles in my work, mostly through kind of just like a way of understanding histories of ornithology and the ways in which that they're collected and preserved in South Asia. There's this really beautiful book actually by Leonardo da Vinci. It's like his intense study on plants and gardens that I've been really thinking a lot about. So I read that all the time in the studio. And just kind of a curiosity to also kind of learn more about sitting in on ecology classes and learning about different types of environmental science and ornithology, just as a way to kind of help myself, kind of hold myself accountable and responsible to bridge the gap between kind of art and science, and find a way to kind of surrender to the unknown and realize that there's so much knowledge, scientific knowledge, that is so beautifully connected with kind of craft practices and art practices. And one of the ways in which we can do that is kind of, for me, is always kind of approaching the role of making work through the lens of always being a student and like trying to constantly learn. And so, I read this beautiful book from the 1930s, different types of birds in Kashmir, birds in India, and mainly just kind of understanding those histories. And similar to what Madhur was saying in her poem, like my own mother, I think we all have stories of like grandparents and aunts and uncles and mothers talking about plants and birds from a context that feels quite very kind of radical, because it kind of harkens back to a time where communities were maybe more collective. And so I think that's also something that I'm thinking a lot about, is using the history of birds in plants and gardens as a way to help alleviate the isolation of like that we sometimes can find ourselves in, and artists living in a time of like hyper globalization. And I don't want to use the C word, it rhymes with capitalism, but I don't use that word. But yeah. So mhm.
And what about you, Hasabie?
Yeah, for me, birds actually play a very important part of my work, simply because in studying early cinema, early filmmaking techniques, one of my first references to the moving image, or I guess one of the first moving images that we see are Edward Muybridge's Birds in Flight, the kind of separated frame by frame photographing of birds in order to study movement. So they actually play a very large role in my understanding of movement and speed and motion. There's two birds in my animation. One is a hummingbird. As I've said, in during the lockdowns, I was very much contained to the house I was staying in Los Angeles, and I would sit outside in the garden patio in the morning. So it was really a chance for me to search for a body that was outside of mine. Like, I feel like so much about animation is really understanding how other beings move and imitate that. And that's part of the kind of, I think it could really open up space for kind of empathizing with something that is not you. So actually so many of the insects and the worms and ants, ladybugs you see in the animation are actually just from the around me that I was observing, right outside of my window. And so there is a hummingbird that would come from the back of the house, and every morning I would look at it and try to study it and draw it, and that's why it became part of my animation. The other bird wasn't around where I was. It's called Turcano ruspoli. It's named after an Italian explorer, and it's one of the indigenous birds in Ethiopia that is on its way to extinction. So I thought I would include that bird as one of the final creatures that would help move from one set of letters to another, just to pay tribute to the bird itself. And next year, I'm hoping to work on a full project surrounding the story of the bird. It has a very interesting story that, for the sake of time, I will reserve myself from explaining.
With you after you make it.
So that's the story of birds in the work.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. There is one more question, so I think that we'll take that and maybe end on this question here, which is from Anna, and she says, I like this idea of tracing and residue. I wonder how and if you see memory and nostalgia as something that never was fitting into this.
Yeah, I think it kind of makes me think a lot about history as like a material practice, and something that's to quote Haas, like something that one can revisit over and over again, and every time you revisit it changes. So I think memory and nostalgia, I think, play a role in the sense that they can hold you accountable to not really romanticize a particular moment that you're trying to kind of understand, but really look at it through nuance and through clarity. And so for me, this idea of like approaching something through the lens of like a memory, or is to do it in a way in which I think the role, like I think this idea of the myth of the victim narrative is kind of eroded out of it, and it's left with something tangible and real that kind of thrives off of nuance. Yeah. Thank you, Anna, for that question.
Yeah, great question. Great questions in general. And lots of lovely comments in the chat, which I'll let you look at. But I guess we can conclude there. It was wonderful to speak with you all. It's like just so beautiful. And it's really nice to see, you know, your practices sort of presented in a way that allows you to sort of feel the dialogue between them, or the dialogues rather. It's multiple. So I'm very thankful to you both for this.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And, you know, happy Diwali, light a candle.
Yes.
Eat something yummy.
And enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone. Bye.